Hey everyone, this is your plant histology lab. I am going to go over the function and form of some specific plants with you, and I'm going to start with the systems of the plant, then go to the organs of the plant, and the tissues of the plant, and in some cases I'll go to the cells of the plant. So we start big and we funnel down small. Let's start here and tell you that we're going to be going over some of these systems, the stem systems, the root systems. We're going to be distinguishing between monocots and dicots. That's what we're studying in this lab, and the systems and organs that are associated with those. And then we're going to concentrate on the tissues after we get through all that. So let's start big and funnel down, and let's know where we are in our taxonomy. If we start with our domain, remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We start with domain. We are in the domain Eukarya still. We've done Eukarya for animal cells. Now we're doing Eukarya for plant cells in here. So our kingdom is now plants that we're looking at. And in fact, if we go down a little bit farther, we can go down from our kingdom of plants to our phylum, and there are two phylum under plants at least, and one of them is non-vascular plants and vascular plants. And you may wonder, vascular plants have a system for moving water and nutrients around, much like animals do, and in fact we're derived obviously from plants. Non-vascular plants are simpler plants, and they have no system for moving around water and for moving around nutrients, so they have to remain very low to the ground. And in fact, these are mosses and liverworts, which are very low to the ground plants. When you have vascular plants, now you can have some height. And in fact, when we look at vascular plants, the name of this phylum is Tracheophytes. And now you can take this apart and you realize that phytes is associated with phylum. But the tracheo looks very familiar from your animal kingdom, and the trachea that is essentially a pipe for gases into animals. And now you are seeing the origin of that in the pipes that move gases and move nutrients and liquids through plants. So these are called brachiophytes. That's their phylum. And what's next? So you have a domain, kingdom, phylum, class is next. So the class is spermatophytes, and spermatophytes, you see that in there, the sperm, and yes, this is the start of sexual reproduction. In the plant kingdom, it's the first kingdom on the evolutionary order that has sexual reproduction, and spermatophytes are seeded plants that are the result of sexual reproduction in the class. We are going to be studying angiosperms, which is one level down. So you have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order. Your order is going to be angiosperms that you're studying in this lab. When we look at the angiosperms that we're looking at, they are noted as sexual reproduction by flowers. So we are going to be studying the systems and the organs and the tissues that are associated with flowers in this lab for angiosperms. That's your order. What can you do for sexual reproduction without flowers? That is the order of gymnosperms, which are essentially conifers. And they have cones that are characteristic of their system for sexual reproduction, and the ovule and the sperm that are involved in cones. We're not going to go there. We're going to stick with flowers with ours. When we do look at angiosperm and these flowering plants, they can be divided again. And the next order down is domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family. We're into family now. The two families that we're going to look at for this lab are monocotyledon family and the eudicotyledon family. So let's take apart those words so that you'll remember it. When you look at monocotyledon, you see mono there, and you know mono means one. And when you see eudicotyledon, you see the di there, and you know di means two. So we can look into that a little bit more. One cotyledon. Well, what is a cotyledon? Let's go into that next. When we look into what a cotyledon is, it is Greek for cup. And we're talking about the first leaf group that derives right directly from the seed. So in other words, the first leaf is within the seed, ready to go upon germination. A monocotyledon family has one leaf that rises up as the sprout, and a dicotyledon family has two leaves in the seed ready to go upon germination. We call this eudicotyledons and eudicots because there's still some controversy over the characteristics in this dicot group. And in fact, magnolias could be considered a dicot, but there's still a lot of controversy about how these particular families should line up. We're not going to get into the controversy. We're going to stick with true. Remember, eu is a prefix in Greek that essentially means true. Pretty easy to remember. The true dicotyledons, the true two leaves within the seed. And we're going to compare that to the monocotyledons, the true one leaves within the seed. When we do this comparison between the monocotyledon families and the dicotyledon families, we want to start off with what similarities there are between the families. It's always a good idea to start off with things that go together. And when we look at these similarities, we have a word for it. And the word is synapomorphies. And that is something that you can remember by taking that apart as well. So let's take apart the prefixes and the bases that you see in this word. Well, you see syn in here, and that may remind you of synapsis, because we've just studied nerve cells. And that is actually Greek for the word for together, which makes sense because when we're talking about nerve cells, they're all lining up to work together. And when you see the prefix apo, that is actually Greek for away from, like ablation, right? Ablation is referred to as an apo prefix. But you also see this in synapsis, because you see the ap in synapsis as well. And although it might seem strange to be together and away from, give me a second and I'll get there. The base of the word is morpho, which makes sense. That means shape. And we're talking about the characteristics that are in common for the shapes of these flowering plants. So the shapes of the stem, the shapes of the flower. So if you think about it, we are looking at something like unique or away from characteristics that these angiosperms have in common or in a synaptic relationship. So these are synapomorphies. That will be really helpful for you to remember for your exams. That's why I go over the word of synapomorphies. There are 4 of them in angiosperms that we're going to go over. And the first one is this. Let's go over the function, and then the common form will come into view. The first thing that all flowering plants have in common for their function is that they are vascular and taller to optimize photosynthesis. The reason they got taller is because they wanted to have a closer outlet to the sun to provide more energy for their organism. So the function was to grow taller. How did they get there? They got there through the form of their vasculature. And in fact, one thing that angiosperms have in common is their phloem, which is a structure that, a tissue for carrying sap all over the plant in any direction, up or down. And that was unique. Prior to that, there were no multi-directional vascular systems in the kingdoms that were being studied that were evolved before this. How are you going to remember that phloem tissue? That is the number one characteristic in common for these flowering angiosperms. You're going to remember that because phloem is like flow, and in fact, it's taken from the Greek for that. So this phloem tissue that you will learn about in the vasculature up and down the plant is your number one thing they have in common. Your number two thing that they have in common is that they need to protect this new sexual reproduction and this new seed. And they have a number of ways of doing that. The second synapomorphy that angiosperms have is they have a housing to protect their sexual reproduction. And this one part of the housing is called the carpel. That is Greek from the word for harvest. If you ever saw the movie with Robin Williams, where he yells, "Carpe diem, seize the day," right? In other words, harvest the day, use the day. That's what that phrase means, carpe diem. Use the day, harvest the day, really work on the day. That applies to carpel in here. This is the house for sexual reproduction that protects the ovary. And the ovary will turn into the fruit that you harvest out of here. We'll go into that more soon. The third synapomorphy that angiosperms have in common is also protect sexual reproduction. This one is to protect the sperm and consequently the seed that arises from it. And this form of that function is the stamen. And these stamen are here right near the ovule. And the stamen, you'll remember that word because it comes from the Latin word for stand. And in fact, stamina, or the ability to stand for hours, is related to stamen. So these are the stamen very close to the ovule. The stamen develop and protect the pollen grains, and they hold them very close to the carpel top that is the tube into the ovary. So these stamen have those two purposes of protecting the pollen grains and then helping them to have minimal distance in order to get to the ovary. We'll go over that in a second too. The fourth synapomorphy between angiosperms is the fact that they have double fertilization, and that produces an endosperm. Well, what is that about? An endosperm is actually the first view of a placenta that nourishes an embryo. So let's look into that a little bit more. Double fertilization. Well, it turns out that pollen grains carry a number of sperm with them. They carry at least 2 sperm per pollen grain. Those sperm that pollen grain will sit on top of a stigma. Because think about it, a bee is going to go to this flower and get all of the pollen all over their wings and all over their body. And then they're going to rest on top of this area called a stigma. It's a great resting place for a bee that's working very hard. And then they're going to drop their pollen off of their wings, and it falls right on top of the carpel, which will allow that pollen grain to start digging a tunnel down through this area called a style. So this is a stigma, a platform, and this is a style that allows the pollen grain to start digging a tunnel and taking its sperm with it all the way down here. This pollen tube will come all the way down